my next speaker is none other than Michael Laine. So thank you for passing it on to me so I can pass it back to you. Many of us know Michael, a strategist, a futurist, an author, a speaker, a consultant, a connector in our community, an integral part of the Blue Marble Week team, and as many would agree, a very nice guy. Michael has been involved with space elevator research since the definitive 2001-2003 NASA study. At LiftPort, he manages a talented team from academia, government, commercial, and military communities. Michael's team has created carbon nanotubes, discovered a new metal alloy, and built robots that climbed a mile into space. There's a lot more to learn about Michael, and I'll let him take it from there. Please, Michael.
Thank you very much. I feel like I've been talking for 3 days straight. In hindsight, I kind of wish I didn't have this presentation, but I'm really glad that I'm here. This is an amazing last couple days. So I want to shout out to the rest of the team for just what they've accomplished over the last few days. So thank you, everybody. And I'm going to jump straight into my thing, but I just want to express my gratitude to everyone. When I first started LiftPort, the world was radically, fundamentally different. And I just want to kind of take a moment to think about that for a second. Twitter didn't exist. Facebook didn't exist. These things that we take for granted, fully digital phones with touchscreens didn't exist. It was a very, very different place. So by way of a little bit of history, behind me, I think it's off screen, but behind me is that right there is the first report on the Earth elevator. The idea of building a space elevator off the Earth. I was a part of that original NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts research team. Fast forward for the next 2001, 2, and 3, we put that thing together. Fast forward again, when the Space Shuttle Columbia crashed, we started LiftPort as a direct result of the report concluding and the Columbia crash. Over the next couple of years, we built a whole bunch of robots. We invented a bunch of string, and there's a bunch of artifacts over here. So it was really fun. And to that 2001, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6 were great. 2007, everything unraveled. My wealth came from real estate. And when the real estate markets collapsed, everything fell apart very, very quickly. That's a very long, complicated story. We were out of business. We were out of business for a really long time, from 2007 to 2017, when we reconstructed the company to focus exclusively on the lunar elevator. So let's think about that, right? So the first couple of days of our event, we were talking about down to earth stuff, and then we moved to orbital stuff. And the last couple hours, we've been talking about the moon. But that's where we're going. And I'm really, I take a lot of personal pride in the relationships that we've built. General Quast once said that some of the stuff we were talking about is the most important conversations in our nation's history. And then he was a 3-star general in the Air Force. And then the chief scientist of U.S. Space Force has really been a great mentor to me. We've taken our ideas and put them in front of the chief scientist, and they've held weight, right? They've held together. In the world that we're in now with Twitter, with Facebook, we also have the luxury of waiting those 10 years while some new rules were put in place. And they focus on the commercialization of LEO and then going back to the moon to stay. And that's really what we want to accomplish. There's rules out there in the language, in the federal language, about basically building a facility with a bunch of inhabitants. So we want to be a part of that ecosystem, the cislunar econosphere. In order to do that, you've got to get really, really good at a lot of really complicated things. Space is a pinnacle technology, and it requires mastery of these 6 subordinate technologies: robotics, materials, communications, energy, biotech. These things are necessary to get to space well. And as we build out the infrastructure, lots of stuff is going to happen down here on the ground. Launch is going to get better. We're going to get better at communications and observation. Soon, we're going to have in-space transport. We talked about that yesterday with Nagar and her team. We talked about that with Daniel Faber and his team. I think our lunar elevator fits in this larger discussion. We're going to talk more about that in a minute, so I'm going to skip this. Space stations, mining, and eventually space-based solar power. Peter Gerritsen's going to come up after me in a moment. The 2 topics between the elevator and the space-based solar power are the only aspirational topics of the last 3 days. But I think they earn a place on our roadmap. So then what are we talking about when we're talking about the lunar elevator? First, I think this is what it looks like. And I've told all of our speakers, I don't want to see a bunch of CGI and pretty pictures. We've had some pictures of CGI and pretty pictures, but for the most part, we've shown hardware. Other than the hardware behind me hanging up on the wall here, we don't have that kind of hardware because our technology is not that fully developed yet. So what are we? Who are we? We'll talk about the lunar elevator in detail in a moment, but we're also a business. That's something that everybody seems to forget. They get really interested in the tech of what we're doing and the cool factor of what we're doing. But at the end of the day, to keep the lights on, we have to be a business, right? So we call ourselves an idea factory. We're a technology incubator, and we use the vision of the future as the lens to focus our work. So what is this, right? So we've got, a long time ago, we had support from NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts. We've got some support from US Space Force and the Air Force Space Command. I don't think this is an exaggeration to say that we have 3 millennia of experience of folks interested in what we're doing. Not on contract, nobody's on payroll. Well, some people are on payroll, but when you add up this many people trying to make this thing happen, it says there's an ecosystem that wants to make this lunar elevator happen. So I'm really happy to say that our advisors are what we refer to as our technical advisory council. We have hardware everywhere in the solar system. And that gives me confidence that this thing can actually be built. It's not easy. Nothing about the last 3 days, none of these technologies that we've been talking about, these elements of those larger cislunar econosphere, none of this stuff is easy, none of it. But I really believe most of it is possible. I've tried really hard over the last couple of days to organize content that was very near term and available. So here's what we're actually doing, what's actually happening. We launch from Earth. We get to the Lagrange point. The Lagrange point is this gravitational middle, not the physical middle, but the gravitational middle between the Earth and the Moon. And that's represented over here with what will eventually be a space station. That's the gravitational middle. So, whoops. So we launched from Earth using a conventional rocket. We've heard lots of things about rockets the last couple of days. There are a lot of opportunities and options for which rocket. The bigger the rocket, the more string we can put down, the more cargo we've got. It doesn't really matter which rocket. We've sized this as small as a Falcon. So we're in good shape there. We get out to the Lagrange point. We drop a string down to the surface of the Moon. We pull that string back towards the Earth, not touching. It's still a long ways from the Earth, right? Here, this tiny dot is the Moon. And this is to scale. I really want to stress, this is to scale. The objects that we are creating, our counterweight, our string, our space station, that's not to scale, but the moon on one side, the Earth on the other, and the distances, that's to scale. So this tiny dot is the moon. We're going to go here. We're going to drop a string down. We're going to sink in. We're going to hang on to the moon. We pull the system back through the Lagrange point. Anything on this side of the Lagrange point is being pulled back to Earth. So this counterweight is gently being tugged, and that keeps the whole string straight. On the Earth elevator, everybody focuses on getting off of the planet. On the lunar elevator, the key is actually arriving at this Lagrange station and dropping, using a robot, down gently to the surface of the moon. That's the key. It's really hard to land on the surface of the moon. With this system, we take that complexity out of the equation. But there's more to it than that. So these are the systems. This is the length, right? It's 250,000 kilometers in string. Now this string, it's really important to note, exists. I have some of it sitting on my shelf right here. This is not the carbon nanotubes that we talked about for the Earth elevator. It's not even the exotics that we talked about yesterday with the Graphene Council. This is straight up normal industrial scale materials that are purchase orderable. And even though this string is a lot of string, it's 10% of annual production. It's a big order, but it's not like we have to build new factories for this, right? So this is achievable technology. We have the rockets, we have the robotics, we have the materials, we have the communications. All of these parts exist. This is one of the main reasons why we want to do it. Again, sorry for the CGI graphics, but these are modeled after Bigelow style, inflatable style, Axiom style space stations. We would emplace this at the Lagrange point. You'd have the robot climbing back and forth, but this station is the reason for building it, right? The cargo capacity back and forth to the moon, that's really cool. We really want to be able to do that. But it's this emplaced and attached to the moon space station that really makes the rest of this project work. We're talking about some orbital mechanics. So here's the whole system, right? I want to tie in, oops, I'm out of order. I want to pay attention to the pieces of this, right? So this would be the lifter that climbs back and forth, the rovers that scroll around on the lunar surface. We already know that that's really difficult. These are the components of the system, right? You've got your counterweight, you've got your anchor station attached to the surface of the moon, the lifter robot climbing back and forth. There's infrastructure for managing the rovers within this. This is a side view and a top-down view. So these are kind of the components that make up the system. It's a simple power array. We're using just normal photovoltaic cells. The string is really tricky. There's a pretty high coefficient of friction here. And so it's slippery, right? So we have to wind all the way down. So that's a little bit complicated, but still very manageable. When we build this system, there's going to be a lot of activity that goes from the Earth out to the Lagrange point and back. It is actually mathematically and delta V cheaper to do this round trip than it is to go from Leo straight to Geo. Now that seems a little bit crazy, but we learned yesterday about the utility of having a full tank of gas in orbit. So whether we fill up here or here, there's advantages from a delta V perspective. And again, here's the moon right here. This point right here is super important. I thought I had a slide on it, but apparently I don't. We've talked about delta V over the course of the day to get the energy it takes to get from the Earth to low Earth orbit, to get from the Earth to GEO, to get from Earth to the Lagrange point. It's about 3 to 4, okay? So if that's a measure for energy, to say that it's 0.14 to go all the way out to Mars, all the way out to the NEOs, that's really impressive, right? It's about 9 delta V to get to Leo, and then about 4 more to get to Geo. So this is, let's say, 13. It's a fraction, it's a decimal point off of that, right? So that makes it almost energetically free to get anywhere else in the solar system. That's one of the values of having that space station there. We talked about this a little bit. The robot, what we refer to as a lifter, comes down, docks in with the system, and then we have cargo. So that's kind of how we move things around. Oh, there's the video. There's the image I was looking for earlier. Delta V. It's almost energetically free to get anywhere else in the solar system, especially if you start here with a near full tank of gas, right? Super useful. So positionally, it's useful. This goes back to some of the stuff that Major McLean was talking about before. This conversation is incomplete if we don't talk about the other parts of it. Hardware is the thing that everybody pays attention to. The things I pay attention to are business outreach and framework. So that's a conversation that's going to take a lot longer, but I want you to understand that those are necessary pieces of all this. Where did my, all right, that was out of order. What are we talking about, right? This is one of those mega structures that all the other infrastructure helps to enable. $1 million helps prove our math. That's the first easiest step. Then about 4 more million, total 5, builds the initial satellites necessary to test this. Then, because launch costs are dropping pretty easily, 20 more gets you to 25 million. That gets us flight tested. And then we start getting stuff built. The entirety of the Lunar Elevator infrastructure is about $800 million. That probably is in a high number. That's probably on the high side. People are surprised sometimes when I tell them it's under $1 billion. I live near Seattle in Tacoma. There's 5 different billion-dollar infrastructure projects in our local town. This is an achievable number. There are many space projects that are under that, or that are in that range. There are many commercial projects that are within that range. So this is a very fundable number. I hear loud and clear when Michael says, who are the customers? We can talk about that later. I do believe that space-based solar power is the killer app for space. I've believed it for nearly 20 years as I've been in this field. To build a complete solar power network, I think is in the neighborhood of about $8 billion. To put that in perspective, one nuclear power plant for one city is between $5 and $8 billion. This $8 billion that I'm referring to would have a repeatable infrastructure that could power a very large percent, maybe 40% of the global population. So I don't shy away from it. I stand by my numbers. This is an achievable technology. So why are we an incubator? First of all, it's about return on investment. It's about near-term revenues and risk mitigation. Like, this is who we are. We want to be an idea factory that develops public-private partnerships, and as we get better at public-private partnerships, develop this larger infrastructure. We're going to generate revenue based off of spin-off, exits, licensing, and subsidiaries. Our partners are going to be NASA and Space Force. And the infrastructure that we're looking to build is orbital operations. We're talking about space stations. We're talking about fuel. I think it's important to talk about real estate, that this real estate is very important. Along the way, we're going to get very good at robotics and energy and computing. We already have some interesting spin-off technologies. We've created a new alloy. We've got some communications and observation systems. So this stuff, on the one side, it's a big idea, and on the other, it's very achievable in a methodical, stepwise process. Something that Dr. Autry said yesterday was, look, space businesses that have big ideas that can close business markets now, that work incrementally, that have a big idea, but have, immediate steps, those are the companies that succeed. And I think that LiftPort and the Lunar Elevator is one of those ideas that can succeed. We have a few minutes there. I'm happy to answer questions the rest of the time. My contact information is here. Oh, it's actually not here. It's on the first slide. It's Laine at LiftPort, Laine at LiftPort. And I'd be happy to chat with folks. This is a complicated project and a complicated system. So it does take a little bit of work. Okay, I'm gonna turn it back over to you guys. Who's asking me questions? What's going on next? So I've been doing all of the questioning and the moderation and the other stuff. So I think, Tim, you're asking me questions. Is that right?
I am.
Okay, nice to meet you, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Michael. It's really good to finally meet you. Yeah. So the first question, you touched on this, it probably in part because I told you ahead of time I'm not going to be nice to you in questioning.
Good.
You mentioned the 800 million for the price of the space or the lunar elevator being probably high. At what point does a X Prize style purse make it reasonable to cut that number in half? And when I say at what point, I mean at what launch cost per pound per kilogram does it make sense for the government or a private entity to say, hey, there's a $400 million prize for the first person to build a lunar elevator, go?
Yeah, $400 million would be a hell of a prize for sure. I don't think it needs to be anywhere close to that. I mean, I'd be happy to put my hat in the ring for that, but I don't think it needs to be that much. I think with Julian's presentation, it's definitely not just the United States that's thinking about this stuff. So I think you'd have American, good old-fashioned know-how, but I think you'd have a lot of international partners that would want a piece of that, right? So there has been talk about prizes, I will say, as small as 100 million for doing activity on the moon, and prizes as large as $1 billion to doing activities on the moon. Those kinds of prizes are certainly incentivize. The world that we're living in right now is a direct result of some of the X Prize work that was done, almost 15 years ago, 2001, I think. So we have seen the evidence of the success of that. So I don't think that I won't deny a $400 million prize, but I don't think that number has to be that high.
No, I'd agree. I would prefer to give you a smaller purse and claim the cost savings on any press release that.
Right. Yeah. Start with a $400 million price tag.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
You have something like 20 companies, 17 companies on the first X Prize, and we've got 5 renewable rocketry companies as a result of that. That's a hell of an ROI for a $10 million prize. Yeah. And then on this call, Michael Mealing was a part of a different X Prize. And earlier on the call, Emma was part of a different X Prize, Google Lunar X Prize. And so she is a pro in the field, even though she didn't come up with another company. Like the spin-offs and value of things like that have enormous spin-off potentials, social, economic, financial, educational, science. Yeah, it's everywhere. Do that thing.
Yeah, and this gets to a question Katie put in the chat, that how do you communicate that part of the project, not just to investors, but to the public? Because ultimately, especially for the lunar elevator, the message is cool, great, that sounds awesome. I can't even get to space right now. Why would I get to an elevator on the moon? So how do we communicate those tangential benefits, or the message that even if this fails, we are still better off because this technology is going to mature, that technology can be used elsewhere?
You know, Julian put up a slide that had this kind of reverse hockey stick, right? Prices are here. There's an inflection point. I referred to it earlier as the Starship Singularity. I think that is inevitable. Whether, you know, you could argue that dates, but that price curve is dropping so profoundly that that we can't really see what people are going to do. We did a conference, the Space Elevator conference, a long time ago. Dr. Swan and I think Michael Fitzer was here yesterday. They threw out a question to the audience: what would you do if the price to orbit was $500? They threw it out. They threw out this question: what would you do? What were the big ideas? And some kid, I think it was a high school student, said something like they would launch junker cars from orbit and create intentional meteor showers to celebrate somebody's birthday. Like that's the level of, I will say, goofiness and potential in the same sentence. If you bring prices to orbit down, so whether it's an Earth elevator or a lunar elevator, bringing the price to orbit down opens up things we can't even guess about right now.
I mean, realistically, we can guess because it's the same as what happened when airfare became cheap.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
We
All
just
right.
fly anywhere for any reason at any time until a pandemic breaks out,
Right.
and then we stop.
And then we stop. Yeah, no, I think, you know, price to orbit is always the hardest thing. I watched a really interesting, Jeff Bezos came down to Texas to receive an award, I guess two Novembers ago. It was a pretty small crowd. There were probably 125 people in the building. It was pretty cool. It was pretty neat. And what he said really kind of stuck with me. It's like, look, you couldn't do Zoom, right? He said Facebook. You couldn't do these things that we take for granted now if there wasn't the original founding infrastructure of the internet. And I think that's kind of how we are, right? That the whole last couple of days have been talking about infrastructure. And it's not just one specific technology. Rockets are enabling, but then what else do they enable? So we need all of these parts. We need gas tanks, and we need simulant, and we need ride share, and we need visionaries. So all of these parts make up the ecosystem, but the right nowness of it, it feels pretty good right now. It feels pretty good right now. Like we're really close to that Star Trek vision that I wanted, that all those books talk about. We're really close.
True. It's true. And I want to echo Michael's point that we don't need more launch capacity. We have enough air freight. Now it's time for some rail and sea equivalents to move everything for free so that we can actually get to space cheaply and be able to realize these dreams people have been having.
Terrific. Okay, I'm going to renew my moderation process. Thanks a lot, Tim. Appreciate that.